Sometimes, the darkest moments bring the brightest hope. Watch how a billionaire found more than just a boy. He found family. Let's get into this emotional and heartwarming story. The wind whispered softly through the old trees in the quiet cemetery. The sun was low in the sky, painting everything with soft gold and orange light. The day was coming to an end, but the grief hanging heavy in the air made it feel colder than it should. James Holden stood at the edge of a small grave, his tall frame still and stiff. His dark eyes stared down at the fresh earth that covered his son's final resting place. Michael, his only son, had died 2 weeks ago in a car accident. James had never felt pain like this before. It was as if a part of him had been torn away and left behind in that hospital room. He was not alone at the grave. A few steps away, a young boy knelt on the ground, crying silently. The boy looked thin and worn, his clothes old and dusty, the kind of clothes you might see on someone who had little to eat or a warm bed at night. The boy's face was stained with tears, and he held a small, tattered photograph close to his chest. James's heart ached when he saw the boy. It wasn't just because he was crying. There was something familiar about his sorrow, something raw and deep that spoke to the loneliness James felt inside. The billionaire took a cautious step forward, not wanting to scare the boy away. "Are you all right?" James asked softly, his voice gentle but steady. The boy looked up quickly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. His eyes were red and glassy, but he didn't say anything. James sat down on the cold stone bench nearby. "I'm James. This is my son's grave." His name was Michael. His voice cracked for a moment, but he kept talking. "I come here every day because I miss him so much." The boy didn't answer, but his trembling hands clutched the photograph tighter. James noticed it was a picture of 2 boys, smiling and happy, standing in front of an old run-down house. "That's Michael with you, isn't it?" James asked, nodding toward the photo. The boy swallowed hard, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he whispered. James's heart broke a little more. He wanted to reach out, to comfort this stranger who seemed to share his pain. "What's your name?" he asked. "David," the boy replied, barely audible. "David? Michael spoke of you sometimes. He said you were his best friend." David looked at James, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You knew him?" James nodded. "He was my son, and I want to know about your friendship, David." For a long moment, David said nothing. The wind rustled the dry leaves around them. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, David spoke. "Michael was the only friend I ever had. We grew up together in the same neighborhood. We didn't have much, my family. We barely had enough to eat sometimes. But Michael, he was different. Even though he was rich, he never acted like it. He was kind." James remembered his son's laughter, his bright smile, the way he always tried to help others. "Tell me more about him," James said softly. David looked down at the ground, searching for words. "Michael was the one who stood by me when no one else did. When the other kids laughed at me because my clothes were torn or I didn't have new shoes, he never laughed. He said I was his brother." James's throat tightened. "That's what a true friend is," he said quietly. David's tears started again, but this time he didn't hide them. "When Michael died, it felt like my whole world ended. I didn't know where to go or what to do. So I came here. I needed to see him one last time." James looked at the boy with a mixture of sadness and respect. "I lost him too, David. He was my son, and I didn't get to say goodbye." David's eyes met James's, and something shifted between them. It was as if 2 broken hearts found each other in the vast emptiness. "Would you come with me?" James asked after a moment. "I want to learn more about Michael through your eyes." David hesitated, then nodded slowly. He stood up, dusted his knees, and followed James out of the cemetery. As they walked, James thought about how different their worlds were. He lived in a mansion, owned businesses worth millions, and had everything money could buy. David lived in a small, run-down home on the edge of the city, where hope was a rare thing. But in that moment, none of that mattered. They were just two men bound by grief, learning to lean on each other in a world that had suddenly become too dark. James reached out and gently put his hand on David's shoulder. "We'll get through this together," he said. "For Michael." David looked up and smiled, a faint light in his tired eyes. For Michael. The sun had fully set, and the sky was painted deep blue with sparkling stars above. James and David walked slowly along the quiet streets, the weight of their shared grief making silence easier than words. James had invited David to his home. It was a huge place, filled with light and expensive things, but tonight it felt cold and empty, like James's heart. David kept his eyes on the ground, unsure where he belonged in this world of wealth and luxury. When they arrived, James offered David a warm meal, but the boy only picked at his food. The hunger wasn't only for food, it was for something deeper, understanding, comfort, and maybe hope. James looked at David and finally said, "I want you to know it's okay to feel pain, to cry, to be angry. Losing someone you love, it changes everything." David's eyes filled again. "Sometimes I don't know how to keep going. My mom works 2 jobs just to pay rent. We don't have much. When Michael died, it was like losing the only light in my life." James nodded. "I feel the same. Michael was my whole world. Now every day without him is like walking through darkness." David swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. "I never told anyone how much I loved him. I thought if I did, it would make me weak, but now I know I just miss him so much." James reached out, his voice steady but kind. "You're not weak, David. Loving someone means you have the strongest heart. It's okay to share your pain. It's the first step to healing." David looked up and met James's eyes for the first time that evening. For a moment the boy let his walls down. He felt the billionaire's sorrow and knew he was not alone. James shared a story. "When Michael was a boy, he once came to me crying because he lost his favorite toy. I told him, 'Son, it's just a thing. What matters is what's inside your heart.' Michael never forgot that." David smiled faintly. "He always told me to keep hope alive, even when things looked impossible." James's voice broke. "I wish I could have been there more for him. I was busy with work, thinking I had all the time in the world." David nodded slowly. "I spent so many days thinking he would always be there. I never imagined he could be gone." The room was quiet except for the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. Both men sat there, feeling the weight of what they had lost. David wiped his tears. "I don't know how to live without him." James's eyes softened. "Neither do I. But maybe together we can find a way." David looked around the grand room again. "I don't belong here," he said honestly. "I'm not like you." James shook his head gently. "You belong wherever you feel safe. And right now, I want you to feel safe here. This house is full of memories of my son, and now it's a place where your memories can live too." David looked at James with a mix of fear and hope. The world felt confusing, and yet something about James made him want to believe. James stood up slowly. "I know this is hard, but grief is a journey, and you don't have to walk it alone." David nodded, his voice firm. "I want to learn how to be strong, like Michael." James smiled. "We'll take it one step at a time." For the first time in weeks, David felt a small spark of hope. The pain was still there, but sharing it made it lighter. That night, as David lay on a soft bed in a guest room, he thought about Michael, his best friend, his brother, the boy who believed in him when no one else did. And for the first time, David realized maybe he could believe in himself too. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of James's house. Birds chirped softly outside, but inside the grand mansion, a quiet tension lingered. David sat at the large kitchen table, nervously stirring a cup of tea. He felt out of place here, surrounded by fine china and polished furniture, so different from the cramped, worn-down home he knew. James sat across from him, giving him space, but ready to listen. After a few moments of silence, David took a deep breath and looked up. "I want to tell you about Michael, about us." James leaned forward, his eyes warm and encouraging. "I'm listening." David's voice was soft but steady. "We grew up in a poor neighborhood on the edge of the city. Our families weren't rich, not like you and Michael's. My father worked odd jobs, sometimes without pay. My mother cleaned houses and washed clothes. There were days when we didn't know if we'd have food." James nodded, already imagining the hardships. "But Michael..." David smiled faintly, tears threatening again. "Michael never treated me like I was less than him. When we were kids, he would bring me small gifts, sometimes just a candy bar or a comic book. That was everything to me." David's hand shook as he held the photo again. "We dreamed of a better life together. Michael promised that one day we'd both be successful. He wanted to help me go to college, to get out of the neighborhood." James's throat tightened. "Did he talk about his family? About what he wanted to do?" David nodded slowly. Michael was full of hope. Even though his parents were wealthy, they didn't understand him. He felt trapped, like he didn't belong in their world. James leaned back, thinking. "I admit, I didn't know much about Michael's childhood. I was busy building my business. I wanted to give him everything, but I missed the chance to be there for him." David's voice cracked. "He didn't say much, but I think he felt lonely sometimes." James reached out his hand, and David took it gently. "Thank you for telling me, David. It means a lot." David took a deep breath and continued. "The night Michael died, we were supposed to meet. He wanted to show me his new plans for college, but I never made it." James's eyes filled. "What happened?" David swallowed hard. "There was a car accident. I heard about it on the news. I ran to the hospital, but it was too late. They told me he didn't survive." James's hands clenched into fists. "I remember that night. The worst night of my life." David's tears spilled freely now. "I felt so lost. I wanted to tell him everything, how much he meant to me, but I never got the chance." James pulled David into a hug. For a long time they held each other, two broken souls finding comfort in their shared pain. When they finally pulled apart, James looked at David with determination. "You're like family to me now. I want to help you, David. Not just because of Michael, but because you deserve a chance." David blinked in surprise. "Why would you do that?" "I'm just a poor boy." James shook his head. "Because Michael believed in you, and I want to honor his memory by believing in you too." David's heart pounded with hope and fear. Could this be real? Could a billionaire truly care? James smiled. "Tomorrow, we'll start fresh. You'll come live with me. I'll help you finish school and learn new things." David's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can. I'm scared." James nodded. "That's okay. We'll take it one day at a time. You're not alone." David looked around the room, feeling a strange mix of fear and excitement. For the first time, he imagined a future beyond the broken streets he called home. That night, David lay awake in the guest room, thinking about everything he had shared with James. The secrets he had kept locked inside were now out in the open. He thought of Michael's smile, his kind words, and their dreams. For the first time since the accident, David felt a small light inside him, hope, and he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the memory of his best friend guiding him. The next morning, the mansion felt alive with a quiet energy. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting long shadows on the polished floor. James moved around, preparing breakfast while David sat nervously in the large dining room. For David, this was a new world, so different from the small, worn-down home he had always known. The walls were tall and painted with bright colors. The furniture was soft and clean. The air smelled of fresh flowers and rich coffee, but despite the beauty, David felt small and out of place. James placed a plate of pancakes in front of David. "Eat up," he said with a smile. "You'll need energy for today." David nodded, but his appetite was gone. His mind raced with questions and fears. How would he fit in here? Would people look down on him? Would he be able to keep up? James noticed David's hesitation and sat down beside him. "I know this is a big change," he said softly, "but you don't have to be afraid." David looked at him, eyes wide. "I'm scared. I've never been around people like you. What if I mess up? What if I'm not good?" "Enough!" James smiled gently. "No one expects you to be perfect. Everyone starts somewhere. The important thing is that you try." David took a deep breath and nodded. "I want to try." After breakfast, James showed David around the mansion. The house was like a palace to David, rooms filled with paintings, books, and expensive things he had only seen on TV. They stopped in a cozy study lined with bookshelves. "This will be your room," James said. "We'll set up a space for you to study and relax." David ran his fingers along the smooth desk. "It's nice," he said quietly. James smiled. "It's more than nice, it's a new start." Later, James introduced David to some of his staff, the housekeeper, the cook, and a tutor named Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark was kind and patient. She smiled warmly as she shook David's hand. "I'm here to help you learn. We'll work together to reach your goals." David felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could work. But the real test came when James took David to visit the school Michael had attended. The building was large and modern, filled with students dressed in neat uniforms. David's heart pounded as they walked through the halls. He felt the weight of stares, some curious, some judging. He remembered the worn shoes he wore, the faded clothes, and felt the sting of shame. James noticed David's discomfort. "Remember," he whispered, "this is your chance. Don't let fear stop you." David nodded, trying to stand tall. At the principal's office, James spoke with the headmaster about enrolling David. The principal smiled kindly and welcomed David, saying, "We are happy to have you here." Michael spoke highly of you. David's eyes widened in surprise. Michael had talked about him. That gave David strength. As they left the school, James turned to David. "This is the first step, David. You're not alone anymore." David smiled shyly. "Thank you, James. I don't know how to say it, but I want to make Michael proud." James's voice was steady. "He already is proud of you, and so am I." That night, David lay in his new room, the soft sheets unfamiliar but comforting. He thought about his old neighborhood, the cracked sidewalks, the noisy streets, the faces of friends and family who had watched him struggle. Would they understand this new life? Would they accept him? David didn't know, but for the first time, he believed in a future where he could rise above his past. And that belief was the most important step of all. David woke up early the next morning to the soft golden light streaming through his bedroom window. The big mansion was quiet except for the distant hum of morning activity, footsteps on polished floors, voices from the kitchen, and the gentle clinking of cups. He sat on the edge of the bed, his heart pounding with excitement and fear. Today was his first full day living in this new world. A world he had only dreamed about from his small, crowded room back home. He took a deep breath and stood up, feeling the soft carpet under his feet. He walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling gardens outside. The green lawns stretched far, dotted with colorful flowers and tall trees. David could hardly believe this was real. Downstairs, the kitchen was alive with the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee. James was there, talking quietly with the cook, a friendly woman named Grace. "Good morning, David," Grace said warmly when she saw him. "Come, have some breakfast." David smiled nervously and sat at the large wooden table. The spread was unlike anything he had ever seen. Fresh fruit, eggs, toast, and steaming porridge. He picked at the food, but still felt shy and unsure. James watched him with understanding. "Take your time," he said gently. "This is all new, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed." After breakfast, James took David on a tour of the house again, this time more slowly, showing him the library, the music room, and even a small indoor gym. David's eyes grew wide at every new room. He touched the spines of books in the library and saw titles he recognized from school, along with many more he had never heard of. "This is where you can study," James said, "and this room," he continued, "is where you can relax and listen to music or practice an instrument." David's heart swelled. He had always loved music but never had the chance to learn properly. Later, James introduced David to a young woman named Ms. Clark, who would be his tutor. She had a kind smile and a gentle voice. "Hello, David," she said warmly. "I'm excited to work with you." David felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this time he could succeed, but the real challenge came when James took David outside. They walked through the gates of the mansion into a quiet neighborhood of large houses and clean streets. It was so different from David's old neighborhood. No noise, no cracked sidewalks, no stray dogs or piles of garbage. David's stomach tightened. This was a world he had never known. James stopped in front of a sleek, black car. "This will be your transportation to school and anywhere you need to go." David stared at the car, feeling small and unsure. He had never ridden in anything so fancy. James smiled. "It's just a car, David. Nothing to be afraid of." As the day went on, David met some of the staff who worked for James, the gardener, the housekeeper, the security team. They all greeted David kindly, but he noticed the curious looks from some. He felt the weight of their silent questions. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? That evening, David sat alone in the music room. He picked up a guitar that rested in the corner and strummed a few notes. Music was the one thing that made him feel calm, no matter where he was. As he played softly, memories flooded back. Michael teaching him simple songs, their laughter in the dusty streets, promises they had made. David's fingers trembled, but he kept playing. A knock came at the door. It was James. "You play beautifully," James said, sitting beside him. David smiled shyly. "It helps me remember." James nodded. "Music can heal, just like learning and growing will." Days passed and David slowly began to adjust to his new life. At school, he faced new challenges. The lessons were harder, the students more confident, and the expectations high. Sometimes David felt like he didn't belong, but with Ms. Clark's help and James's encouragement, he kept pushing forward. At home, he spent hours studying in the library, practicing music and learning about the world beyond his old neighborhood. Still, sometimes the loneliness crept back. One afternoon, David sat in the garden watching the sunset. James joined him quietly. "You're doing well," James said softly. David looked up. "But sometimes I feel lost, like I don't fit anywhere." James smiled kindly. "That's normal. It takes time. But remember, you're not alone. You have people who believe in you." David's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. He was in a new world, full of possibilities, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The days that followed felt like a mix of new beginnings and quiet struggles for David. Every morning, He woke up to the sunlight filtering through the curtains of his new room, a place that still felt strange but safe. James had kept his promise. David was enrolled in school, had tutors, and even began to explore music lessons with a patient instructor. But the biggest challenge was not in learning new subjects or practicing chords on the guitar. It was learning to trust. Trust in himself, trust in others, and trust that he belonged. One morning, Ms. Clark arrived early at the mansion, carrying a pile of books and notebooks. "Good morning, David," she greeted with a bright smile. David smiled back, but inside he felt nervous. Learning had never been easy for him, and now the pressure was stronger. Ms. Clark sat down next to him at the study table. "We'll start slow," she said, kindly. "You don't have to be perfect, just be willing to try." David nodded. "I want to do well. I want to make Michael proud." Ms. Clark's eyes softened. "Michael was lucky to have a friend like you." That day they worked on reading and writing. David struggled with some words, but surprised himself when he mastered others. James came by the room during a break. "How's it going?" he asked. David shrugged, trying to hide his frustration. "It's harder than I thought." James sat beside him. Learning anything new is hard at first, but the more you practice, the easier it gets. David looked at James, unsure if he really believed it. Weeks passed, and with patience and effort, David's confidence grew. He began to ask questions, join class discussions, and even help younger students. But trust didn't come easily with James. At times, David felt distant from the billionaire. James was kind, but sometimes busy with work or lost in his own grief. One evening after dinner, David found James sitting alone in the living room, staring at a photo of Michael. David hesitated, then sat down nearby. "I miss him," he said. Softly, James nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "Me too. Every day." David took a deep breath. "Sometimes I feel scared, like I'll never be good enough." James reached out and placed a hand on David's shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be you." David looked at James, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Michael believed in second chances," James continued. "He believed people could change and grow." David's heart ached with hope. "I want to believe that too." Their friendship deepened with moments like this, quiet talks, shared memories, and gentle encouragement. But David's past wasn't far away. One afternoon, James received a phone call that shook them both. It was from David's mother. She sounded worried but grateful. "Thank you for helping my son," she said, "but we miss him." David's eyes filled with tears. He missed his family too. James looked at David and nodded. "Maybe it's time to visit your home." David was scared. Returning meant facing old challenges and doubts, but he trusted James and felt ready. The next weekend, they traveled to David's neighborhood. As they approached the worn houses and crowded streets, David felt a mix of emotions: fear, shame, and hope. His mother ran to hug him tightly, tears streaming down her face. James watched quietly, understanding the importance of family. David introduced James to his mother and little sister. They shared a simple meal and talked late into the night. James saw the strength in David's family, their struggles, their love, and their dreams. Before leaving, James promised to help support them. David felt a deep sense of belonging he hadn't known in years. Back at the mansion, David's trust in James and himself grew stronger. He began to believe in the future Michael had dreamed of. He knew the road ahead would be long and hard, but he was no longer alone. Together, they were building something new: hope, healing, and trust. The weeks after visiting David's old neighborhood brought a mix of hope and challenge. David felt the comfort of being back with his family, yet the weight of his past followed him like a shadow he couldn't shake. Returning to school and the mansion had given him a new world to grow into, but his old life was still very real and very demanding. One afternoon, David received a message from his childhood friend, Jamal. Jamal was from the neighborhood, tough and streetwise. They had grown up together, sharing dreams and struggles. The message was simple. "Where you been? We miss you. You ain't the same no more." David stared at the screen, heart pounding. He wanted to reply, but fear held him back. Would his old friends accept the new him, or would they see him as someone who had forgotten where he came from? Later that day, David walked through the neighborhood alone. The streets were noisy and crowded, full of life and chaos. Children played soccer on broken sidewalks. Vendors shouted, selling fruits and snacks. The air smelled of cooking fires and dust. Some neighbors smiled and waved at David, happy to see him. Others looked skeptical, whispering behind their hands. As he passed a group of young men sitting outside a small store, one called out, "Hey, David, you think you're too good for us now?" David's stomach twisted. He forced a smile. "I'm still me," but deep inside he felt torn. He wanted to prove he hadn't changed, but he was scared of losing himself. That evening, David sat with James in the mansion's study. "I'm worried," David confessed. "I feel like I don't belong anywhere. My old friends think I'm different, but I don't know how to be like I used to." James nodded slowly. "Change is hard, but growing doesn't mean forgetting who you are. It means becoming the best version of yourself." David looked down, feeling small. "Sometimes I think they'll never understand. Maybe I don't belong anywhere." James placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You belong wherever you choose to be. You have the power to build your own path." The next few days were challenging. David felt the pull of his old life and the promise of his new one. At school, some students whispered about him. They noticed his old clothes and the way he spoke differently. David tried to ignore it, but it hurt. One afternoon, a classmate named Rachel approached him. "I heard about your story," she said gently. "It must be hard." David nodded. "It is. Sometimes I don't know where I fit." Rachel smiled. "You're brave for trying, and you're not alone." Her words lifted David's spirits. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, David's mother worried. She saw her son changing and feared he might forget his roots. One evening, she sat with David. "Remember where you come from," she said firmly. "Don't lose yourself trying to be someone else." David hugged her tightly. "I won't forget. I'm still your son." With time, David began to balance the two worlds. He helped organize a small after-school program for kids in the neighborhood, teaching them about music and reading. James supported the idea, providing books and instruments. The program became a bridge, a way for David to connect his past and future. One afternoon, as children laughed and played in the community center, David felt a deep sense of peace. He realized he didn't have to choose between his old life and new one. He could be both, a boy from the neighborhood and a young man with big dreams. James watched from the doorway, proud. He knew David's journey was far from over, but he also knew his heart was strong. And sometimes the past returns not to hold us back, but to remind us where we started, so we can see how far we've come. The air was thick with anticipation. In the grand hall of the school auditorium, students, teachers, and parents filled the seats, chatting quietly in groups, waiting for the ceremony to begin. It was the day David had dreamed of, the day of the annual scholarship awards. David sat nervously in the front row, dressed neatly in his school uniform. His heart raced, a mix of excitement and fear swirling inside him. He looked around, at the crowd, seeing familiar faces, some supportive, others skeptical. and wondered if he really belonged here. James sat beside him, offering a reassuring smile. "You're ready, David," he whispered. "Just be yourself." David nodded, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. The principal stepped up to the podium, her voice clear and strong. "Welcome to this year's Scholarship Award ceremony. Today, we celebrate hard work, dedication, and the promise of bright futures." When it was time to announce David's scholarship, the room fell silent. The principal smiled warmly. "This year's recipient of the Michael Holden Memorial Scholarship is David Okoye." A wave of applause filled the hall. David's cheeks flushed as he stood and made his way to the stage. The microphone felt heavy in his hands. For a moment he froze, but then he remembered Michael's words, to keep hope alive, to never give up. David looked out at the audience and began to speak. "Good evening. I'm honored to receive this scholarship in memory of Michael Holden, my best friend, my brother, who believed in me when no one else did." He paused as tears welled up. "Michael taught me that no matter where you come from, your dreams are valid. He showed me the power of kindness and friendship." David's voice grew stronger. "This scholarship is not just for me. It's for every child who feels alone, who thinks their past defines them. I want to be proof that with hope and hard work, we can change our stories." The audience rose to their feet, applauding loudly. David's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. Later, James hugged David tightly. "You made him proud," he said softly. David smiled through tears. "I'm only just beginning." The scholarship opened doors David had never imagined. He attended new classes, met inspiring teachers, and found mentors who believed in his potential. With every lesson learned, David grew more confident. He joined the debate team and discovered a talent for speaking and leading. One afternoon, during a practice session, David stood before his classmates and delivered a speech about hope and perseverance. His words flowed with passion and sincerity, touching everyone in the room. Afterward, a teacher approached him. "You have a gift, David. Use it to inspire others." David nodded, feeling a new sense of purpose. Outside school, David worked with James to expand the after-school program he had started in his neighborhood. Together, they raised funds to provide books, computers, and music instruments for children who needed them most. The program became a beacon of hope for the community, offering a safe space for learning and growth. One evening, as David watched the children laughing and playing, he thought of Michael, felt his friend's spirit beside him, guiding him forward. James joined him, smiling. "You're building a legacy, David, one that will change lives." David looked at James with determination. "I want to give back, just like Michael would have." Their bond grew stronger with every step they took together. David's journey was far from over, but this turning point marked a new chapter, one filled with promise, courage, and the power of dreams. The sun was bright and warm over the small community center in David's old neighborhood. Laughter and music spilled out of the windows as children gathered for the after-school program David had started with James's help. It was a place filled with hope, learning, and joy, so different from the struggles the neighborhood had known before. David stood at the doorway, watching the children play with the new books and instruments they had received. His heart swelled with pride. This was more than just a program. It was a promise to the children that their lives could be better. "David!" a small voice called out. It was Tolu, a bright-eyed boy from the neighborhood, holding up a drawing he had made. David smiled and knelt down. "Show me, Tolu. What did you draw?" The boy proudly showed a picture of a tree with strong roots and colorful leaves. "This is the tree of hope," he said. "It reminds me that even when things are hard, we can grow and be strong." David's eyes glistened with tears. "That's beautiful, Tolu. just like all of you. Over the months, the program grew. More children joined, and David worked hard to create activities that inspired them. There were reading circles, music lessons, and art workshops. The neighborhood began to change, not just in appearance but in spirit. James visited often, always impressed by the progress. One afternoon he sat with David in the community center's small office. "You've done something incredible here," James said. "This program is giving children a future they never imagined." David nodded. "I want to do more. I want to create schools, scholarships, and opportunities for everyone who needs them." James smiled. "And you will. I'll support you all the way." David's family was proud too. His mother often helped with the program, cooking meals for the children and welcoming parents who stopped by. One evening, David sat with his mother. On the porch of their old home, the neighborhood was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of street lamps. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You've changed not only your life, but all of ours." David took her hand. "I couldn't have done it without you. This is our future, our community's future." But giving back wasn't always easy. David faced challenges. Some local leaders were skeptical, questioning whether the program would last. Others were jealous of the attention and support David received. One day, David was confronted by a man named Mr. Aid, a powerful figure in the neighborhood. "You're stirring things up," Mr. Aid warned. "People don't like change. Be careful." David stood firm. "Change is needed. Our children deserve a better life." The man's eyes narrowed, but David didn't back down. James advised David to stay patient and focused. "Not everyone will understand your vision," he said, "but keep going. The impact you're making is real." David took those words to heart. He worked harder, reaching out to schools, businesses, and community leaders to build partnerships. Together with James, they organized fundraisers and awareness campaigns. The program received donations and volunteers from all over the city. One special day, a large group of people gathered at the community center for the official opening of a new library and learning center, funded by James's company and supported by local donors. David stood at the podium, his voice strong and clear. "This center is more than bricks and books," he said. "It is a symbol of hope, opportunity, and the power of community." The crowd cheered as children ran through the new rooms, exploring shelves filled with books and bright computer stations. David felt Michael's presence in the joy around him. His best friend's dream of a better future was alive and growing. Later, as the sun set over the neighborhood, David and James walked through the streets together. "You've come so far," James said. "I'm proud to call you family." David smiled. "This is just the beginning. We're building a legacy that will last," James nodded. "And that legacy is love." David looked up at the stars shining above. He thought about the journey, from the lonely grave where they first met to this moment of hope and promise. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but with faith, hard work, and the support of those who believed in him, he was ready. The past had shaped him, but it would not define him. David was giving back, not just to his community, but to the memory of a friendship that had changed his life forever, and that was the greatest gift he could ever share. The day was bright and warm, filled with the sound of celebration and joy. David stood on the stage of the city's grand auditorium, surrounded by friends, family, teachers, and supporters. Today was his graduation day, a moment he had dreamed of since that first visit to Michael's grave. Wearing a cap and gown, David looked out at the crowd, feeling the weight and the wonder of the journey behind him. From a poor boy in a small neighborhood to a young man standing here, ready to take on the world, his path had been long and difficult, but it had also been full of love, hope, and the kindness of those who believed in him. James sat proudly in the front row, clapping, louder than anyone else. He had been there every step of the way, a steady rock in David's life. When the principal called David's name, the applause grew louder. David walked confidently to the stage, his heart pounding with pride. He took the microphone and smiled, remembering the first speech he had given, the one about hope, friendship, and the power to change. "Thank you all," David began. "Today is not just about me. It's about the people who helped me, believed in me, and gave me a chance." He looked toward James. "My journey began with the loss of my best friend, Michael Holden. He taught me what it means to believe in someone, to never give up, and to live with kindness." David's voice grew strong. "Michael's memory has guided me every day. This diploma is not just mine, it is his legacy." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. "I want to dedicate this achievement to every child who feels alone or forgotten. You are not alone. With hope and hard work, you can change your story." Tears filled many eyes in the crowd, and some people stood to give David a standing ovation. After the ceremony, friends and family gathered around David. His mother hugged him tightly, pride shining in her eyes. James approached, his smile wide. "You did it, David. You made a difference." David nodded, overwhelmed. "I couldn't have done it without you, James, without Michael's faith in me." James placed a hand on David's shoulder. "Now it's time for you to lead, to be the light for others." David knew the road ahead would not always be easy. There were still challenges to face, dreams to chase, and people to help. But he was ready. In the weeks that followed, David continued his work in the community. With James's support, he expanded the after-school programs, started scholarship funds, and built partnerships with schools and businesses. He spoke at events, sharing his story to inspire others. One afternoon, David stood outside a new building, a community center named after Michael Holden. The plaque read, "Michael Holden Memorial Center, a place of hope, learning, and friendship." David smiled, feeling the weight of the moment. "This is for you, Michael," he whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." James stood beside him. "You're carrying his legacy with grace and strength." David looked out over the children playing in the yard, their laughter ringing like music. He thought about the lonely grave where he had first met James, two broken hearts finding each other. Now, those hearts were whole. David promised himself he would continue to live, with love, kindness, and hope, the gifts Michael had given him. He would never forget where he came from or the friend who changed his life. And in doing so, he would build a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Because sometimes love is the greatest legacy we can leave behind.